Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And in my last video, I talked about the idea of getting nymphs sitting in the surface film. Nymphs that are unable to break through the surface tension and basically exhaust themselves, and they become easy pickings for fish. So I thought, let's design one. Now, you saw my test tank footage of what these look like, what I'm attempting to do. And I call them floating nymphs, but they don't really float, all right? You need a bit of floating on them to make them stay up. And I think that I prefer that, rather than add a lot of foam to them and make them buoyant so they'll actually stick in the surface film by themselves. Because I don't want them protruding through the surface film. I want them hanging just below. So that was the plan anyway. And I did that test tank and I left that fly in the water for over 24 hours and it was still floating with fly floating on it. But if I didn't have any floatant, it would sink. And I thought that's ideal. This is perfect. We can sort of, move things around a little bit, grease the leader, not the fly, do things like that, have some options, as opposed to having a great big blob of foam and having it stay on top just through the foam. So let's get started in talking about the material. Now, the hook I'm using is a Daiichi 1270. It looks like the Tiemco 200R. So use the Tiemco 200R if you want. I'm just showing you the style rather than anything else. The thing I'm going to talk about, though, with this hook, it's a light wire hook, and that's important. You don't want to use a heavy wire hook. It's a long shank with a small gape, which is another thing that reduces your weight. So you could use an extra long dry fly hook, for example, and it would do the same job. Be, a size 16 extra long would do the same thing as this size 16. So just long hook, small gape. Our thread is a Vivas 8/0 in black. You could use olive to brown, whatever you want. The tail is going to be pheasant. We're going to use this laser dub in olive for the dubbing, and you want a shiny, bright, sparkly type dubbing because these insects have gas in their body, and that's quite bright and shiny. We're going to cut off a strip of this white foam to make the wing hump, which is full of gas, which is the reason why it's white. Also helps with visibility. Your odds of being able to see this fly in the water are kind of low, but if there's not much foam around, you might be able to spot it. And lastly, we're going to do the legs out of this yellow mallard. I'm just going to use the yellow mallard because it shows the segmentation quite well. If you look at some of the pictures of some of these mayfly nymphs, they do have a bit of yellow sometimes in their legs, so I thought, what, it shows up. So we'll use that. So let's first get started and get the thread started. Keep some room at the front because we're going to show you don't want to crowd the front at all. Bring around to the bend and just put a bump in there. Now for our tail, 3 or 4 strands is enough. Make sure the tips are aligned. Now as far as length goes, different species have different tail lengths. So I'm going to keep this fairly long. And you just put a few turns in there, trim it off. Now bring your thread forward. And this is where we tie in our legs. And you notice I haven't brought my thread very far forward because we're going to be having to tie the foam in there. And if you crowd it, it's going to look pretty bad. I'm just going to try and find some nice straight tips for my legs. We turn it around and we tie it in, tips facing forward. Okay, got that off. You bring your thread to the rear. Now we'll start to dub. If you've got any stray bits, you know, that are too long, trim them off. I mean, it's nice to have a buggy appearance, but you don't want things that hanging off really long. Now I'm going to take this little bit of foam here that I've already cut a strip off of it, and I'm just going to tie this in. Keep it on top. It spins. Bring it back on top. Wind back so you are crowding into the dubbing here. And then bring your thread forward out of the way. And then bring it back. Now we're going to go add some more dubbing. Okay, at this point we're going to separate the legs. And what you can do is you use the half hitch tool to push them back. Bring your foam over. Put a turn in there. I like to bind that down. And come in with your scissors and trim it as close as you can without cutting your thread. Now we'll just trim that. Now we'll just wind this down. Cover up the white. And now we can whip finish. Okay, there is our floating nymph. You can, do a little bit better job of covering up the white than I did, but it really doesn't matter all that much. And if I find that I've got a bit too much in the way of bits hanging off, I'll trim that a little bit, give it a bit of a haircut, so it's not too wild. And try and get some separation in the tails, a little bit better than that. But that's pretty well it. There's your floating nymph. The whole idea is for it to hang over in the surface tension with the body hanging down, looking rather limp and helpless, like it's exhausted. And the fish come up. If you've ever seen those really lazy emerger rises where the fish just comes up and goes, and you just see a bulge in the water, they're probably taking one of these. So give it a try, the floating nymph. I went with white foam, so A, you can see it, and B, it's bright. And keep in mind the thorax of these nymphs are bright because they're full of gas. So that's what the white does. And as I say, when you add some floating to that, it will stay on the surface. And what's nice is it's just the foam that stays in there. The rest of the body hangs below, which is what we're looking for. So there we go, the floating nymph. Cheers.